this is Jason Galisatus with PenTV for a special edition on race in San Mateo County. We are joined today by Kalimah Salahuddin, who is the president of the Jefferson Union High School District. Welcome, Kalimah. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
One of the areas that's consistently brought up in addition to policing is education. And you recently wrote an op-ed in the San Mateo Daily Journal titled Correcting Inequities in Education. Could you explain a little bit about the inequities that we see manifested in the education system and how we can begin to correct them?
So I think a really good way to look at it is the inequities that we don't see. I think those are the ones that are the most problematic because they've been so ingrained into the system and the way we operate that a lot of people don't see them as inequities. So if you look at the curriculum and how students who make up predominantly the large portion of students in public education system, but the smallest part of any curriculum that's put in front of them. And that's not just when talking about books that they read, but also reflected in the math problems, reflected, in the scientists that are used as examples of scientists and the pictures that are hung on the walls. It's not enough, one of the quotes that I've heard, it is not enough to open doors for students to walk through, but you also have to have mirrors that reflect themselves so they can understand and know what's possible for them.
And how much of this comes down to differences in resources and how they're allocated? Because we have the school funding formula in California that guarantees a baseline, but some districts get more than that baseline. Can you explain a bit how that works and how can we reinvest in some of the schools where there's been less investment, especially for lower income communities and communities of color?
So there's a letter that needs to happen about the state of California getting real about public education, and that public education in the state of California in general and throughout the entire state is drastically underfunded. And when you talk about how we're funded in this state compared to the states that are relative to us, we're talking about the New York and the Massachusetts and states like that, our students are getting half of what those students are getting. But those students, when they grow up, they come here for jobs. We all know people from the East Coast that are out here for the biotech and the technology jobs that we offer. But Alaska, like students in Alaska get a larger per pupil funding than students in California. So that's the first inequity that we need to look at. The second line is students are funded by property tax value. So if you live in a wealthy school district, you go to a school that's higher resourced. If you live in a poor community, you go to a school that's lower resourced. And that just on its face doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Every student should receive the same level of funding, regardless of where they live. So that is going to take a drastic rehaul of how we finance education in California. It takes a long time, but what we can do in the interim, what we could do right away is just get all of our school districts in California funded at the minimum level of funding or at an average level of funding for the rest of the United States. California is still not even at average level of funding for the United States of America. And we know it costs a whole lot more to do business in California. Another thing that California can do is fund in relation to cost of living. So the per pupil funding in California is the same if you live here, if you live in Stockton, and those are two drastic cost of living ratios. So there should be more consideration in California about that. But here in San Mateo County, you can drive 20 minutes and the per pupil funding will increase by almost $10,000 per student in some areas. So how is that equitable? That is something that needs to be addressed.
So certainly we see disparities in education brought into stark contrast under this pandemic. But another area that we're seeing inequities really brought to the forefront is policing and how different communities perceive policing differently and are treated differently by police. That's nothing new. Like the inequities in the pandemic, they're nothing new. But This time feels different. The response feels different. Why do you think that is?
So this is something I've thought about for a while. I'm not entirely sure. I do think that due to the pandemic and most of us sheltering in place, uh, people had the space to pay attention to what was happening. Um, then there was also, it was just back to back to back incidents that happened that was really hard for people to brush aside. Um, and then I've never watched the video of George Floyd because it's too painful for me to do that. But hearing the description of it, and that it was so long, that it went on for so long, um, I just think it made it hard for people to deny the fact that he called out for his mother who had passed away. I think it was just that moment that really resonated for so many people, where they were able to brush aside whatever didn't allow them to really be empathetic and open up and hear and see what was happening. That moment gave them that space to do that. Um, so the thing that breaks my heart is that he had to give his life for that moment and this moment to happen. And I'm hoping that it is not in vain, that, and we've already seen that more people of color have died, both men and women, because I do also want to talk about that. There are a lot of women that have lost their lives, Black trans women as well. And that this moment is not in vain. Their lives weren't given in vain, and that true change comes out of this.
Yeah. And people tend to think of George Floyd as a national story and the issue of policing reform as a national issue. But in San Mateo County, we've had our own challenges as well. And probably the most recent example that comes to mind is Chinedu Okobi. You have been very outspoken in advocating for justice for Chinedu. Um, do you see a difference between the case of George Floyd and Chinedu as far as how we ought to um, approach that in calling for justice?
I don't see a difference, and I think any rational person that's watched both videos would not see a difference. That the video of Chinedu I did watch because it was in literally my backyard. Right, this is where I live. San Mateo County is my home. Um, and after watching that video, I mean, it rocked me to my core. I am a mother. I have 3 kids. My girls are 22 years old. I have twins, and my son is my oldest, and he's 24 years old. He also has autism. So it has been my fear since they were born that something like this would happen, and that it's not an if when something like this happens, or it's a when. They are going to have an interaction with the police, and I'm praying that when they do have that interaction, that they come out of it with their lives. And I have trained my children since they were born on how to behave. This is how you behave when you are stopped. And watching that video of Chinedu, I realized that there is no training to protect them from that. So, mm, so it kind of leaves you helpless as a parent. Like, what do you do? What do you do? And um, I thought that after the video was released, because there was a lot of skepticism, because right when I heard about it happening, I started talking about it on social media. And there was a lot of skepticism from elected officials who pushed back and said, we need all the facts before you jump to assumptions. And so the video came out, and I thought, okay, the video is out. There should be some response from my elected officials. I know almost all of the elected officials in San Mateo County. And the silence broke my heart. As much as I have given to this county, I would love for someone to give that back to me for my own children. And to see no one speak up and say, this is wrong. The police lied. The law officers that were involved in that did not tell the truth about what happened. The video shows that all he was doing was walking down the street, and when he saw the police, he jaywalked, he crossed the street. The multiple tasers, the use of the taser, something should be done. There should be some sort of accountability, and see nothing happen just rocked me to my core. And so I stopped allowing my son to go to any city that is policed by the San Mateo County sheriffs.
Right.
And now we fast forward to this moment, and I see the same elected officials saying justice for justice for George Floyd, justice for Breonna Taylor. What about Chinadu? It happened right
Well,
here. Do Black lives not
right.
matter in San Mateo County?
Well, and we had a recent vote on the board of San Mateo of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors to approve the purchase of new tasers, and I wonder if you do view that as a discrepancy between, the stated words of Black Lives Matter and the actions on the board.
That was really disappointing for me, because I wish there had at least been, that was a classic opportunity to say, the contract is up. Before we renew it, let's pause. Let's bring in some community members. Let's have a forum. Let's discuss. The reason why they're using tasers is because they're supposed to be a non-lethal weapon. But 3 people have died in 2 years due to taser use. So are they living up? Are they fulfilling the role that they were supposed to? And should they be a tool that our law enforcement officers have access to? I was also highly disappointed in the one public hearing that was held where the company that provides the tasers for San Mateo County used a promotional video in which a Black man was being tased. The intent is clear. They advertised what they're supposed to be doing in a video presented to the Board of Supervisors. So to me, why there wasn't at least a pause to say, let's talk about this, let's have some input before renewing it, at the same time saying that Black lives matter, show me that they do. It's not enough to pass a resolution. Where is the action? Where's the intent that lets me know that my son, my daughter's lives matter?
As you're having conversations with young people, including your own children, and I'm asking this of every person I'm interviewing, what advice do you have as they pursue change and try to advance justice in San Mateo County?
So I have, for a while I didn't have a lot for them because I was struggling with that myself. And that's been the hardest part for me is it's the hardest thing about being a mother when you can do nothing to protect your children and there's nothing that you can say to them about your lack of being able to protect them. But then I said, that's not true. I just have to continue to fight. That's the reason why I continue to fight. That's the reason why I do not give up. And so I continue to try to work with county officials. Um, I have had some positive responses in terms of equity and that they are starting a new equity division. It's still being formed. They made the formal announcement about having a director that's specifically in charge of looking at equity. So that's an ongoing process. And I know that long lasting change is not like flipping a switch. It takes a little while. So I'm going to continue to try to be patient. Um, so those are the things that I don't tell my kids anything. I show my kids. And this is what I'm doing to show them that we'll just continue to fight. We'll just continue to fight for the right to be seen and live just like anyone else in this county.
And what message would you have for allies who are non-Black, who want to support the cause of Black Lives Matter? How can they best be supportive of your efforts?
So I will say, like, elections matter and who you elect matter, and that there is no representation for people of color on the board of supervisors. Um, there's very little representation of people of color in city councils. We have started to make inroads in school boards, and I know that that's how you level up. And I'm really excited to see this new generation of school board members who are of color, and I hope that they pursue higher levels of office. When we go back to education, and I tell people this all the time, we start teaching our kids who is important in school, and who you send your kids to school with, they're important. And there is flight away from schools that have high numbers of Black and brown children in them. They're usually seen as the poorer schools. Um, and I would challenge parents to really think about where they send their kids to school and where they don't send their kids to school. California schools are some of the most segregated schools in the United States. So we're teaching our children from a very early age who they should be around and who they should not be around, what is good and what is bad. If your only interaction or your first interaction with a person of color as a police officer is when you're on the force, of course you're going to have an adverse reaction to us. If you don't grow up and form those connections and bonds and learn about different communities. So I would just challenge people, who do you have interactions with on a daily basis? It's not enough to have just a couple of friends, that there needs to be real communication and connection across community lines so that you can share those lived experiences. Because a person of color, we have no choice. We have to live in the white experience in order to survive. Like, you can't have a job. There's very few old businesses that are owned by people of color. We have to delve into those other worlds, but you can live your whole life out if you're not a person of color without having that shared lived experience. And so I think that there really needs to be more intention about making sure that your children are exposed in a meaningful way to a wide variety of cultures, because our neighborhoods are extremely segregated as well.
Right. And it
And
seems
I'm
like
just going to add
schools
this
are a
really
great.
quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. Just to
No, no.
listen to people of color. Listen to people of color. Now it's been great. I've been asked to speak at a lot of different places and people want to hear me, but this is not my usual experience. Normally I'm drowned out.
Well, we certainly could do a lot more listening across the board, and I do hope schools can present that opportunity for folks to mix. But Kalimah, I really appreciate your being on today. Kalimah Salahuddin, who's the president of Jefferson Union High School District, thank you for being on and for sharing so openly your experiences. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
And we'll be back with Davina Hurt, the immediate past mayor of Belmont. Thank you.